After the Olympians had defeated their Titan ancestors, locking them away in the deep dark pits of Tartarus, the three victorious brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, were left to choose who would rule the universe. So they drew lots for the division of the cosmos, and alas, it was settled. Zeus would reign over the skies, Poseidon would reign over the seas, and Hades, he would rule over the dark, dismal realm of the Underworld. As king of the Underworld and god of the dead, Hades did not reside on Mount Olympus. Instead, he descended down into the Underworld, watching over the souls of the dead. He was also ruler of all hidden wealth of the earth, from the fertile soil to the mined wealth of gold and silver. But Hades rarely ever left the depths of the Underworld, and he was all alone, until he brought his first living visitor, the goddess Persephone. Persephone, the only daughter of Zeus and Demeter. Persephone was an innocent maiden who loved to play in the fields where eternal springtime reigned, but everything would change for her when she fell to the sight of Hades. Hades had other plans for Persephone. He would steal her innocence and turn her into the dreaded goddess of the Underworld. The story of Hades and Persephone is perhaps one of the most well-known in Greek mythology, one that might leave you in doubt if it is a story of great love and great possessiveness, or a story of the worst case of forced Stockholm Syndrome. So stick around, like and subscribe, and do comment what you think after hearing this strange story. Hades. Rarely did he ever leave the Underworld and travel above ground, but it was one fateful occasion that he happened to pass by a field of flowers and see the most beautiful woman. The moment Hades saw Persephone, he instantly fell in love and wanted her as his bride. His brother Zeus, the father of Persephone's, consented to the marriage, or at least refused to oppose it. Yet he warned Hades that Demeter would never approve this coupling, for she would not want her daughter spirited off to a sunless world. At Zeus's suggestion, or with his tacit understanding, Hades resolved to abduct the maiden. That morning, when Demeter descended on Earth with her daughter Persephone, she left her to play with the sea nymphs called Nereids and Naiads, who were the freshwater nymphs of the lakes, springs, and rivers. Demeter went to supervise her bountiful crops. As Persephone engaged in her play with the rest of the group, her attention fell upon the potently fragrant valley nearby, and she couldn't take her eyes off the yellow flower, Narcissus. She called upon her playmates to accompany her, but they couldn't possibly go with her, as leaving the side of their water bodies would result in their death. The flower Narcissus was planted there by Gaia, who was following the orders of Zeus. The goal was to enchant Persephone and attract her away from her guides. Persephone danced her way to the garden alone and tried to pluck the Narcissus from the bosom of Gaia. It drained her energies, as the Narcissus only came out after a lot of pulling. But suddenly, to her utter fright, she saw the tiny hole from which it had drawn out the flower shaft began to rapidly grow in size until it started to resemble a mighty, enormous chasm. From this came the vigorous galloping sounds of multiple horses, and such sudden happenings only froze the frail beauty to her feet. Hades suddenly appeared, thundering across the plain in his 4-horse chariot. The god swooped down upon Persephone, scooped her up in one arm, and literally and figuratively deflowered her, leaving the plain scattered with blossoms of every color. The appearance, abduction, and disappearance happened so swiftly that none of Persephone's companions witnessed the kidnapping. And though she called out to them and plaintively called for her mother, no one heard her pleas. The earth opened up before Hades' chariot, and the god drove the jet-black horses down into the chasm. As Hades and Persephone disappeared into the depths, the hole closed up behind them. Out of all her friends, only the Naiad Cyan tried to rescue the crying Persephone, but she was no match for the powerful Hades. Bereaving her friend's kidnap, Cyan melted into a pool of tears and formed the river Cyan on the spot. Demeter soon came to collect her daughter, but couldn't find a trace of Persephone. Distraught and desperate, Demeter searched high and low for her daughter. Nobody could tell her anything, and furious that they couldn't protect her child, she cursed all the nymphs into becoming heinous women with plumed bodies and scaly feet called the Sirens. It was only the river Cyane who helped her by washing over the belt of Persephone, indicating that something gravely wrong had happened. Demeter went mad and hunted for her daughter everywhere. She disguised herself as an aged lady with a lighted torch in her hands and roamed the earth for 9 long days and 9 long nights. She traveled to the farthest corners of the earth, searching without ever stopping to eat, drink, bathe, or rest. Demeter was in fury. She destroyed lands, crops, and livestock as she bewailed the loss of her daughter. She threatened to make the earth barren forever, and thus destroy all of humankind if she did not find Persephone. It was finally on the 10th day, Hecate, the goddess of magic, witchcraft, spirits, and crossroads, had pity on her dismal condition and told Demeter that Persephone had been carried away, but she did not know by whom. The 2 goddesses went to Helios, the god of the sun, who saw everything that happened on earth. Helios did tell her what happened, but also tried to persuade Demeter that Hades, as Zeus's brother and ruler of 1/3 of the universe, was not an unfit husband for Persephone. Demeter refused to accept Hades as a suitable mate for her precious daughter, enraged by the news of Persephone's abduction and Zeus's possible complicity. She refused to return to Mount Olympus. Instead, she roamed the earth in the guise of a mortal, forbidding the trees to bear fruit and the earth to nurture vegetables and herbs. After a full year of famine, Zeus realized that if he allowed Demeter to persist, all of humankind would starve, leaving no one to honor and make offerings to the gods. Zeus sent a parade of gods and goddesses to Demeter to beg her to come back to Olympus and to restore fertility to the earth. But Demeter refused to budge until her daughter stood by her side. Zeus had no choice. He relented, promising to bring Persephone back to her mother. It was then he summoned Hermes. Hermes raced down to Hades to fetch Persephone. Hades shrugged compliantly and agreed to let her go. Persephone had not eaten a single thing, whether from sorrow, loss of appetite, or stubbornness, since her arrival in the underworld. But before she left, Hades urged Persephone to appease her terrible hunger by eating a single pomegranate seed. Sadly, this apparent act of kindness was a trick. Anyone who tastes the food of Hades must remain in the underworld. In another version of the story, Persephone innocently plucked some fruit from the trees in the gardens of Hades herself. To fight off her terrible hunger, she secretly ate 7 pomegranate seeds, but a gardener of Hades had seen her and ratted her out to Hades. Persephone punished him for his indiscretion by turning him into a screech owl, or Demeter punished him by burying under an enormous rock. The deed had been done. Rhea, the mother of Zeus, Demeter, and Hades proposed a compromise that her children reluctantly accepted. Since Persephone had eaten there, she had to dwell at least part of every year in the underworld. Rhea suggested that Persephone spent 6 months as queen of the underworld and the rest of the year with Demeter. After agreeing to the deal, Demeter restored Earth's fertility and returned to Olympus with Persephone. But when the time came for Persephone to return to the underworld, the earth became colder and less fertile, until her re-emergence months later. Since the abduction of Persephone, spring and summer had given way to autumn and winter, and the earth's fertility followed the progression of seasons. In the fall, seeds, like Persephone herself, were buried underground. In the spring, Persephone and the earth's crops came out into the sun once more. Although she spent only half of her life in the underworld, little is known of Persephone's life above ground after her abduction. Below ground, however, she was dreaded forever afterward as the goddess of the underworld. So feared was she that mortals often invoked her name in curses. Despite her forbidding image, Queen Persephone did sometimes a capacity of mercy. When Alcestis offered her own life in place of her dying husband's, Persephone sent her back from the underworld and spared them both. Persephone also exhibited strong maternal feelings when Aphrodite entrusted her with the safeguarding of the infant. Indeed, she became so enamored with the child that she refused to give him back. Persephone had no children by Hades, but she remained faithful to him, and saw that he remained faithful to her. When Hades attempted to seduce Minthe, Persephone transformed the nymph into a fragrant mint plant. Similarly, she thwarted her husband's attempts to seduce Lus by changing that nymph into a white poplar tree. Hades returned the favor when Pirithous journeyed to the underworld in an attempt to abduct Persephone and bring her back to Earth as his bride. When Pirithous arrived with his friend Theseus and announced his intentions, Hades graciously offered the visitors a seat. The two sat down in the chairs of forgetfulness, stone seats that enveloped and intertwined with their naked flesh. Though Theseus was later freed by Heracles, Persephone remained in the underworld forever, and thus no one could separate Hades and Persephone. So what do you think? A love story or a strange case of Stockholm Syndrome?